Good day, good evening, good now time, all that stuff. Richard, hello, hello. Thanks for joining. Haven't seen you in a while. Hope things are well. Um, right. So this is episode 6 of Hidden History, and some time back we actually I'm just going to go straight into it, by the way, just in case you didn't notice. Some time back we spoke about the making of moon water, and probably the most important aspect of that was the actual practice of drawing down the moon. And I did promise then a show all on its own because it is quite an extensive topic. So here we are. All right. So now, Zanka, hello, hello. Um, I want to start by telling you what this episode is not. It's not going to be a script that hands you the ritual step by step, as if there's one true version sitting in a vault somewhere. There isn't. What we actually have is a phrase that different people in different centuries, doing genuinely different kinds of magic, have all reached for to basically describe the same or something that happens between a witch and the moon. And some of them mean it as an act of consecration. Some mean it as trance and possession. One of them, and we'll get to him, means it as something closer to a hand gesture over a talisman. Um, so Rich is looking forward to this episode. Good. So am I. So, but tracing how these actual or how that phrase moves between those meanings tells you almost everything about how folk magic actually transmits itself. It's not doctrine, but has language borrowed, bent, and repurposed by whoever really picks it up next. Um, so we're going to start with Robert Cochrane. Because if you go looking for the earliest use of this exact phrase in modern witchcraft, he's probably your closest match, actually. Cochrane ran a small, self-styled, traditional craft group in England in the early to mid 1960s, and corresponded heavily with an American named Joe Bearwalker Wilson, who preserved a lot of that correspondence. It's still archived and readable today. You can go find it on the internet. Um, which is a lot more than can be said for most of what's circulated in small craft groups of that period. We will obviously be speaking about Cochrane at some point in the series because he is a very important figure in folk witchcraft, traditional witchcraft, moving into modern witchcraft. But in his fifth letter to Wilson, written in 1966, Cochrane is described or describing what he calls the Cauldron rite. This is a priest thrusting a spear into a water-filled cauldron, a piece of ritual theatre soaked in Grail imagery, right? Life and ash and steel meeting water. And in describing what this or what that act means, he writes that the priest is continuing life by bringing down the principle of movement to Earth, literally drawing down the moon. But notice that Cochrane is doing with that word or dealing with that, or what he's doing with that word literally, the actual word literally. He's not talking about scrying or possession or a priestess going into trance. He's using drawing down the moon as a description of an act of consecration, taking a cosmic principle, the moon as the force of change and movement, and physically anchoring it into a ritual object. In this case, it's cauldron water, through a symbolic act with the blade. It's compressed, almost private language. He was, by most accounts, not writing for a general audience at all. These were personal letters to a specific correspondent who already shared a lot of his frame of reference, which is part of why so much of Cochrane's surviving material reads like you've walked into the middle of a conversation, sort of. Um, but there's a companion piece worth knowing about. It's a semi-fictionalized account Cochrane wrote called A Witch A Witch's Esbat. It's published in mid-1960s. In it, a priestess named Joan lifts a water-filled cup. There's herbs and there's apples floating in it. Presents it to heaven and the moon, then pours it into the cauldron over the fire. Here, the moon's influence is drawn into water through a gesture of offering, and then that charged water becomes part of the rite itself, shared among the coven that was present. Again, this is invocation and consecration, not divination. Worth mentioning because it's tempting to assume drawing down the moon always means gazing at a moon's reflection and scrying by it. But Cochrane's own letters mention scrying tools separately, a dark mirror or a magic mirror, and it never seemed to fuse the two ideas. He treats consecrated water with lunar power and looking into a mirror for visions as two entirely different operations with two entirely different tools. Which then brings us to Doreen Valiente, who will also get a full episode of her own later on. She was a marvelous woman. Valiente doesn't use the phrase drawing down the moon for water scrying specifically, but she gets you most of the way to the mechanics of it. In her book Witchcraft for Tomorrow, this was her 1978 book, she describes cauldron scrying using a silver coin dropped into water, like a moon in the night sky, quotes. And she writes that there is indeed something very lunar about this kind of clairvoyance, adding that practitioners often find they get better results at the full moon. That's the genuinely practical, almost matter-of-fact piece of instruction. Valiente's writing throughout her later books tends to have that tone, laying out technique the way you explain a recipe, stripping of or a lot of the mystique other authors tend to pile on. In an ABC of Witchcraft, under the entry for, again, one of her books, under the entry for moon worship, she covers general lunar lore and history, though notably without laying out a pool scrying ritual there either. And in the same book's entry on scrying, she quotes the folklorist Charles Godfrey Leland from his 1896 collection Legends of Florence, describing an Italian witch gazing into, quotes, a smooth stream or a dark pool at twilight. Though in that particular account, what she's watching for is water spirits, not specifically the moon's reflection. Now, where most people actually encounter drawing down the moon today, at least, isn't Cochrane or Valiente directly. It's through Wiccan liturgy. And the couple most responsible for codifying that liturgy into something repeatable and teachable were Janet and Stewart Farrar. Their books, particularly Eight Sabbaths for Witches and the later A Witch's Bible, effectively standardized what most modern covens mean when they say the phrase. This is the high priestess enters a light trance state, the high priest performs an invocation over her, and she becomes a vessel for the goddess, sometimes speaking spontaneously, sometimes reciting the charge of the goddess, the piece of liturgy Valiente herself largely authored, itself drawing on an older material from Charles Leland's Aradia and Robert Gray's White Goddess, but that's a completely separate thing anyway. But the Farrars didn't invent Rick. Hello, Rick, in the USA. Thanks for joining. But the Farrars didn't, excuse me, froggy throat today. They didn't invent this structure out of nothing. It's clearly downstream of Gardner's original Wiccan framework, but they're the ones who wrote it down clearly enough and popularly enough that it became a default template countless covens since have worked from. If Cochrane's version is compressed private symbolism and Valiente's scrying mechanics. The Farrar's version is the one that got exported worldwide as the ritual. Priestess, priest, invocation, trance, the goddess speaking through a human mouth, literally drawing down the moon into the priestess herself. Kenneth, hello. Nigeria, thanks for joining. Right, but this is, and Agatha's here. Hello. Actually, Agatha, while I've caught you, can you let me know if you got my emails? Because I'm not sure if you did. Okay, just let me know if you got my emails. Otherwise, we'll have to sort something out. All right, carrying on then. But anyway, so yeah, the coming back to the Farrars and their method of drawing down the moon into the priestess. This is almost certainly the version most of you listening, hopefully, well, I don't think actually that many people have even heard of drawing down the moon. But hopefully, most of you listening have actually been depicted or seen depicted in books, in documentaries, maybe even at an open ritual, because it's the one that has or was written down as a script other people could follow, rather than a personal letter or a scattered set of notes. I've got to check emails. All right, yeah, just let me know if you got them. I'm just worried that they didn't get to you. All right. So, worth naming briefly in the, if you want my email address, it's webleydev@gmail.com. Or if you go into my YouTube page, the links at the top right, you should see them there, emails there. Also in the description, as far as I know. Right, where was I? But yeah, okay, so Janet Farrar's later work with Gavin Bone in Lifting the Veil, they tend to revisit and expand this trance technique decades on. This is after Stewart's passed on and everything else. But folding it in more explicit discussion of the psychology of it, and what's actually happening to a priestess's consciousness during that invocation, how to prepare for it safely, how to bring someone back out of it afterwards. It's a good example of how even the standardized version keeps quietly evolving rather than staying frozen at the point of the Farrar's first, or when they first wrote it down. But before we actually leave the witchcraft proper and head into ceremonial magic, there's another version worth putting right alongside the Farrars. In fact, I'd put this alongside Cochrane's, because it was written specifically as a response to it, apparently. But Gemma Gary's Traditional Witchcraft Cornish Book of Ways, which sits in the same Cornish Pella tradition we spoke about previously, includes a section called Rites of the Moon, and inside it, a rite she names, quite deliberately, Calling Down the Moon. And she doesn't pretend the name is a coincidence. She writes plainly that this name is obviously related to the elaborate Wiccan rite of drawing down the moon, but the Cornish version is, in essence, a quite different and seemingly simple rite. So that word elaborate is doing some quiet work there. It's Gary drawing in a line between a trance-possession, priest and priestess, charging of the goddess liturgy we've just covered, and something rooted much more plainly in solitary, hands-on Cornish folk practice. You're not seeing anything. Can you also send me an email, Agatha? Hang on, let me just put it in the chat. I think I've got it open here. You get it right. And then I can respond, I can reply to that, because I've got a feeling it was the wrong email in the stuff. Why is there nothing happening here? Hold on. Okay, I'm just going to carry on. I'll try. Oh, wait, here we go. I think this is it. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this is the right one. Come on. There you go. You can send me an email to that, and then I'll reply to it, so I've got the right email address. All right. So, continuing with Gemma Gary's stuff. So her version goes like this. It's a copper basin, ideally filled with water drawn from a holy well. It's set on the ground under the full moon. Now, the witch stands looking intently at the moon, working themselves into a trance state, then lifts the basin up toward the moon, drawing its virtue down into the water, before lowering it gently back to the ground. Then they kneel before the basin on one knee, look up at the moon once more, and then let their gaze drop slowly down into its reflection dancing in the water. So seeking visions and answers there, right? So, and also a quartz stone is kept close by throughout, believing to enhance what Gary calls the serpentine force running through the rite, and the moon-charged water afterward gets a second life, anointing the witch on or other magical tools. This is almost exactly the ritual a lot of people already assume drawing down the moon means. Basically, gaze at the moon, draw its reflection into a bowl of water, and scry by it. We said earlier in this or tonight that this precise combination doesn't actually turn up whole in either Cochrane's or Valiente's writing. Gary's Cornish rite is very possibly where that popular composite image actually comes from, or at least one of the places it's been kept alive and named outright. But there's a smaller, older feeling cousin to this rite earlier in the same book, which is quite interesting. It's used for wart charming, and when I say wart, I don't mean herbs. I mean warts. You know those little warts you get on your skin. So anyway, in this one, you take the client outside on a clear night under the full moon, hold a shiny copper basin up toward the moon to draw its power down into it, set it on the ground, and have the client kneel and wash their hands in the moonlit water while reciting 3 times, I wash my hands in this thy dish, O man in the moon, do grant my wish, and come and take away this. Okay, and then as the moon wanes afterwards from full, the water is meant to then fade with it. It's the same kind of basic gesture as the visionary rite, basin, moon, water, just aimed at healing rather than divination, which is a nice reminder that in folk practice, the same core technique tends to get reused across completely different purposes rather than each purpose getting its own dedicated method. And here's where Cecil Williamson comes in, because I went looking specifically for whether he'd written about a calling down the moon rite himself after someone here actually mentioned it. I couldn't find that phrase anywhere directly attributed to him, not in his own surviving notebook material published as Cecil Williamson's Book of Witchcraft, and not in any biography or review of it I could get hold of anyway. But Gary's book does contain a very suggestive thread. Among the photographed items from the Museum of Witchcraft's collection in Boscastle, the museum Williamson founded and ran for decades, there's a caption piece described as a West Country mirror-bottomed copper basin to be employed in rites and visionary workings of the full moon when filled with water. That's the exact tool doing the exact job as the rite Gary names calling down the moon. Just a few dozen pages later. Um, Gary also credits Williamson directly in her preface as a hugely important figure in the revival of Cornish magic and Pella cult, someone who dedicated his life to studying and recording the ways of the Wayside Witch. So seems to be a definite connection there. Kai, hello, and okay, so you've sent the email. All right, I'll respond to that email once it comes through, probably after the show. Um, just wondering about demon magic. Okay, we're not covering demon magic today, but what you can do is ask your question, and what I'll do is I'll make a short or something in response to your question. Or if you want to join us on a Sunday, if you can join us on a Sunday, it's like we do a live for like 2 hours. It's cover instead. You can ask whatever questions you want to. Just quite a good place to do that. But yeah, ask your question. I'll fit it in a short somewhere along the line. I'll answer it somewhere for you. Okay. Anyway, so now for the comparison you might not expect in a folk witchcraft show, but I think it definitely earns its place. Donald Michael Kraig's Modern Magick definitely isn't a witchcraft book at all. It's a training manual for high magic, the Golden Dawn descended Kabbalah and pentagram ceremonial tradition, right? But partway through the course, Kraig pauses his ceremonial material to teach what he explicitly calls a low magic or pagan method. His term, not always a flattering one for folk and witchcraft practices as he understands it, but for charging talismans. And the step at the center of that ritual he calls Grab the Moon. So Kraig frames the moon as the goddess aspect of divinity and ties the whole working to lunar phases. So, waxing moon for talismans, things you're drawing towards you, waning moon for amulets, things you're banishing. Of course, those definitions will be refuted and debated by many, many, many people, talismans and amulets in this case. But before we even get to the moon itself, he has the practitioner purify themselves and cast a working space. This is all ceremonial magic, bear in mind. Visualizing a column of white light passing through the body, and a sphere of that same light expanding out to enclose the whole working area, with an optional, more elaborate version involving incense and salted water carried clockwise around the circle, etc., etc. Only after that does he introduce the actual grab the moon step, forming what he calls the triangle of manifestation, which is thumbs like this, um, with thumbs and forefingers touching and holding it up to frame the moon in the sky, or visualizing it if it isn't visible that night, which a good many witches will at least should frown upon, because you're supposed to be sighting the moon. But he describes a second moon appearing to hover just beside the real one. I'm not sure how if he's telling people it doesn't really matter if it's cloudy and you can't see the moon, how do you see a second moon hovering next to the real one? So I really think you need to sight the moon anyway, regardless of what he says. But anyway, the essence of the moon's magical power, in his words, this is the second moon that's hovering there, which the practitioner then concentrates on while slowly bringing their hands down over the talisman, repeating a short phrase representing their intent, and capturing that lunar energy into the actual object. He even describes the sensation practitioners report at the moment it takes, like a sudden lightness in the hands or a kind of snap, at which point you clap or snap your fingers and say simply, "It is done." All right. It's worth noting how different this is from everything else we've just covered. Um, Psycho said you just join on Sundays. Good stuff. There's a whole load of people on Sundays. It's a fantastic community that we're building there, and I think you'll enjoy it. There's a lot of people who can actually also give you some feedback as well, apart from me. I've just got the biggest voice because I don't have to type. So it makes it easier for me. But anyway, all right. So glad that I'll see you on Sunday. Um, where was I? Yeah. So there's no trance. There's no. Coming back to the comparisons anyway. There's no trance. There's no priestess being possessed by the goddess. There's no water, no scrying, no cauldron. It's a solo mental visualization and hand gesture technique borrowed from ceremonial magic's love of precise, repeatable procedure aimed at charging a physical object rather than embodying a deity. Kraig's whole training course is actually built around exactly that kind of step-by-step I can't even say this word tonight. Um, repudicated, repetition. I'm just going to use that word. There you go. Which makes it kind of makes sense anyway. But given the book actually began life as a correspondence course, lessons were mailed out one at a time to students who never even meet their teacher in person. But that's a genuinely different transmission model from everything else in this episode. Unfortunately, it also led to the misunderstanding that you don't need to sight the moon in order to do this practice. And so nowadays, people just blow that off as basically too much work, and it keeps getting passed on and passed on and passed on, and you don't need to see the moon. Which, I mean, if you're looking specifically at astrological magic, you have to be able to sight the moon. All right, but anyway, that's my little rant there. But Kraig is still reaching for exactly the same core idea as Cochrane, as Valiente, as the Farrars, that the moon carries a power which can be drawn deliberately down out of the sky and into something like water, a human body, a talisman here on the ground. It's a different toolkit, same instinct. It's also worth noting Kraig isn't shy about where he thinks low magic and high magic differ and where they overlap. He explicitly frames witches as tending to be more intuitive and right-brained in their practice, contrasting from or with the more logic-driven, left-brain-oriented ceremonialists he's primarily training. Can't say I would agree with that myself, but that's just the way he puts it. But whether or not you buy that particular framing, it's revealing that a ceremonial magician working entirely outside witchcraft still felt the need to build his own bridge into it, and that when he did, the moon was the image he reached for to do it. Right. So okay, so I'll come back to you in a moment. We're almost done with this show. Probably have a bit more time afterwards to answer. Um, so let me just grab something to drink and refresh my mouth. So, what do you actually take away from these different versions of drawing down the moon? It's not a single correct ritual. I'd argue that there's the wrong thing to go. Well, it's basically the wrong thing to go looking for the singular correct ritual anyway with anything. Um, But what you get instead is a genuinely useful case study in how folk witchcraft transmits itself. A phrase gets coined in one very specific personal context, Cochrane's dense private letters written to one friend who already understood his shorthand. It gets picked up and given technical grounding by someone working the adjacent craft of divination, Valiente, writing plainly for a general readership who'd never met her. It gets formalized, taught, and exported by the next generation who needs something teachable rather than poetic. The Farrars writing an actual training manual for covens who wanted a script to follow. And then a regional tradition then answers that elaborate version back with something plainer and older feeling. Gemma Gary's Cornish calling down the moon, a solitary rite with a basin and a reflection, quite possibly the very technique that gave a lot of witches the popular composite image they now assume the whole phrase already meant, always meant, and one that may well trace back through Cecil Williamson's own collection at Boscastle, and from well outside the tradition altogether. It gets independently reinvented by someone working in an entirely different magical system who's reaching for the same underlying, very old intuition that the moon is a source of real power, and that a working witch's job is to bring some of that power down to where they can use it. Right. So before I go back over to the chat, next week we're going from practice back to person. So I'm going to be discussing Isabel Gowdy, the extraordinary voluntary confession she gave in Scotland in 1662 about shape-shifting flight, fairy hills, and a coven account so vivid it's shaped how we actually imagine witch trials ever since. All right, so that's next week anyway. Saikai asked your patron about Hecate will be joining soon. Would it be better to achieve a few material desires than demon magic and making pacts? So I think I've kind of lost you with that. Are you on one of the tiers? I don't recognize the handle. Are you on one of the tiers where, or with a temple or something like that? Just let me know about that. Yeah, let me know about that. Agatha hit the like button after 48-hour vigil. Kenneth, I'm wondering if I'm missing some of the chat here because I forgot to put it on live chat. Right. Oh, you just discovered this channel. Okay. Sorry, then I'm not following your question. Because you mentioned my, are you talking about my patron Hecate? Um, or your patron Hecate, who you'll be working with soon? Um, if you could just elaborate on the question, that'd be great, thanks. Um, and Kenneth, don't you have a WhatsApp group where someone can easily contact you for more teaching? I don't. I've got Patreon. There's various different tiers on the Patreon, and I also have a ton of courses. I've got some workshops running. I started doing master classes, which are kind of like over several months. So yeah, go and have a look on my website and have a look on Patreon. You might find something you're looking for there. Agatha said my carrion flower just started blooming, doing time lapse. Cool. And looks like feed me flower with a hairy mouth biting flies. That's cool. I love those time lapse videos. They're brilliant. All right, so let's see. Saikai said, "Is Hecate better than making pacts with demons?" Oh, okay. I quite frankly, I prefer to build relationships with spirits, no matter what the spirit is. So I don't. I kind of see the whole pact making thing, the way it's spoken about in modern terms anyway, as kind of irrelevant because if you're going to build a relationship with a spirit, you give offerings and you ask for things. I know exactly what the pact is. It's just you're not tying yourself into this formalized oath and bond and contract, and that's what a pact is. You're tying yourself to the demon for a period of time, and you can make pacts with a pact with Hecate if you want to, with gods and goddesses, all types of spirits, and not just demons. A pact is a contract between you and a spirit. You ask for something, you promise to give something in return. Um, so it's usually that transactional kind of basis. But you don't need a pact to do that. And as I said, my personal preference is to build relationships with them. So pact is completely irrelevant at the end of the day. But at the same time, you've got something like the Grimorium Verum, which is all about pact making, and that can be either a verbal pact or a written pact. Um, But that then starts coming into the idea that more of a kind of witchcraft idea of what a pact is, where you are engaging with a particular spirit, whether it is the what a lot of people might call the witch father or the witch mother, and you promise to do something at a certain period of time, like once a year or something. It could be the time when you actually make that connection. It could be an offering or a ceremony you do once a year to celebrate and honor that connection that you have with this particular spirit, and then they will give you a familiar or something like that. So it depends on tradition. It does vary here and there, but again, that I wouldn't really call that a pact in the same way that modern or people in like modern demonology are talking about it, or Left Hand Path are talking about it. It is a pact because it is a promise. You are tying yourself to a contract. Um, and the difficulty here is that modern people in our modern society kind of they go back on their promises way too easily. So a lot of people will make pacts and they don't take these promises and these oaths seriously. They just kind of like make them, and it doesn't matter, if I can't really do what I said I was going to do, who cares? It's just a promise I made to something that doesn't really exist. This is the attitude that a lot of people, Westerners, have, and then they get themselves into a lot of trouble because they've tied themselves into this oath, this bound oath, and they think they can just you know shrug it off, and the spirit wants the return. I'm not going to get out of it. It's a promise. But anyway, yeah. So is Hecate better? Depends on what you want to achieve, um, and it depends if you have that connection in the first place. You might try and connect with Hecate, and you just don't have that bond. You don't have that. You kind of clash. You might try and do the same with particular demons, and you might clash again. Um, so you've got to kind of feel your way through and figure out which spirits you are able to work with, who want to work with you as well, and want to create that bond, that friendship almost, and then a relationship anyway, and then build on it. So slowly. Um, Kenneth, what's your social media pages so I can follow you up? Yeah, really. I don't really. I'm kind of active on Facebook. I don't really do social media very much. This and Patreon are really the best places to get me. Um, and Facebook. If you go to the my page, the front page of my channel, YouTube channel, in the top right hand corner, there's links. You'll find a link tree there, which takes you. I've got TikTok and everything else, but really I'm not very active on them. But there's a load of links in the link tree. So you're going to have a look for that. Psychi, last question. Does your YouTube membership include Demon Magic? No, the membership itself is just basically a kind of like everybody's saying thank you for the content that I produce for free kind of thing. There's nothing really on the membership. Um, if you go into my Patreon, I don't focus only on demonology. I'm a witch. I'm a ceremonial magician. I'm a I don't like to say Kabbalist, but kind of am practical Kabbalist. I cover a whole lot of bases, and it's not just working with demons. It's working with a lot of other spirits as well. So if you find any kind of courses and things that I do, it's not going to just revolve around demonology, just so you know. But Patreon's probably the best place to go. If you join the journal tier on Patreon, which is $10, I talk about a whole load of stuff, and it's quite often things that I'm doing myself at the time. So at the moment we're almost ending now, coming to the last few. I've been going through the Solomonic planetary pentacles and doing one each week. And there's also a book club there where we pick a book and we read it for the month, and then can get into a Zoom call and discuss it. So the journal tier is quite good. And then if you want to go into the temple tiers, that's where you get foundational training. But again, that's not just demonology. That training, that foundational training is kind of what I've put together over the past 30 something years. So it covers a lot of different traditions and paths and everything else. All right, I'm just going to do Alexis, and then I'm going to go at Psycat. There is plenty of material on the stuff you're touching. If you check out the channel, Mr. Lee usually answers questions on Sundays. Yeah. Just go through this channel. There's a ton of videos and all sorts of stuff, and then pop in on a Sunday to Covenstead, which starts at 2 p.m. GMT. And you can ask whatever questions you want. All right, I'm going to go bugger off now. Thank you for joining, everybody. That was quite good today, actually. I enjoy the topic, so that was a good thing as well. All right. Today is Thursday, so I should see everybody on Sunday is the next thing. Yeah. Okay. Have a good one. Cheerio.